Hi, this is Dr. Zeus again with week 6. We're going to be talking about identifying and changing emotional patterns. A lot of this is going to draw on the work that you've turned in the last 3 weeks. I'm going ahead and drawing from your examples that you've offered. I'm not going to provide any kind of identifying information, but your work was so rich and so amazingly high in emotional intelligence that I just felt compelled to be able to share some of it, and then an analysis. Because throughout this class, what we've been trying to do is not simply identify emotions, study emotions, but also to intervene in our emotional patterns, identify and intervene, begin to learn to change them. Now, most of the academic work is pretty pessimistic about this, especially if it happened early on in your childhood. The consensus to them is, well, you just kind of have to avoid the situation. It's ingrained in you. It's linked up to more unconscious and automatic functions, what they call auto-appraisers. I don't happen to believe that. More recent work and research outside of the purely academic circles around mindfulness and other kinds of ways to bring the reactionary state of our emotions to a much more calm level. And also, in your own examples, the notion of consciously being able to understand the pattern, find its source, find how it's affecting you and how it's affecting your relationships, and then finding experimental ways to tamper with that and to change it. We've tried a few different things. One was the notion of surprise, coming up to somebody that's not expecting it and you doing something pleasant for them without anything there for you and seeing what happens. Many of the examples you gave were really brilliant examples. A lot of the people were suspicious. They were thinking, what are you trying to do? Or do you want something from me? And the answer was no. Once they finally understood there wasn't a condition attached to it, then they could relax and pretty much enjoy the gift. Other things that we came up with, I tried to focus on reversal. If you're thinking of a nasty or judgmental thought about a person, which creates in itself probably a feeling that's a negative feeling toward that person, trying to reverse that. If it had to do with judging someone for their weight or judging someone for being a single mother or whatever it happens to be, really turning that on its end and saying and developing a compassionate or empathetic identification with that person and their situation, and stopping your own non-mindful programming where your thinking and your feeling are going together to create a negative situation for someone else, and creating therefore a negative situation within your own emotional environment. So this is going to be a somewhat longer video because there were so many great examples and they bring up so many different insights. Like I said, I'm not going to embarrass anyone. There's no identifying information here. I want to really reach in and bring out the kernel that a lot of you have written about to me. Some of them you've already written on the discussion board. I'm going to, be very sensitive about, sharing the information. I just want to bring out the kernels, like I said, and find ways to let us all learn from each other's experience. So here we go. We're going to give this a shot. I'm down here at the bottom. So basically, again, this is about identifying, changing emotional patterns. Much of this is like a detective game. We are inside our own world and we're not very good at judging our own emotional responses. These exercises are helping you become more self-aware, but then many of you say, okay, now I'm self-aware. It's difficult still to change them. So it's not an easy task, and I don't expect it to be done overnight, but there are some good clues. So take some good notes on this. If you really want to work in the helping professions, and you really want to go on to do research, a lot of what we're going to come up with here will be great stuff to begin to research and do experiments around, and will be great when it comes to a helping profession like nursing or social work or being a psychologist. Really beginning to understand your own emotional patterns and beginning to experiment on yourself and changing those is going to really help make you much more effective in identifying and being empathetic and compassionate to others, but also in helping them develop the craft of changing their emotional patterns into something that is probably less healthy to something that's more healthy. So let's get started. I just threw this thing at the very top. One of you had talked about this notion of choosing to stay mad or sad by basically choosing to recycle or reimagine the stimuli that give rise to particular emotions. It's a great point. How many times do we actually become attached to our emotions? We're righteously angry and we just churn it around in our head over and over again. That reimagining, that rethinking, and that refeeling that comes with that instantiates or entrenches that emotion in us. So that's one really brief and succinct way to interrupt, identify, and change an emotional pattern. Find the times when you're recycling the stimuli and the emotion and the imagining of it to keep you in that state, and find ways to interrupt that. There's also things about, there's a couple of people that said, when this is the question about not being on the same page as someone else, when one person had feelings for this other person, and more romantic feelings, and that wasn't reciprocated, and another student gave the opposite, where that other person had feelings for her and she didn't reciprocate. So what was interesting about this is when there is this difference in feelings, especially around romantics and friendship, oftentimes when those things do collide, they come together in a rather traumatic way that changes the relationship. We don't seem to have a very good way about communicating this, though I don't see why we couldn't communicate and then say, oh, this person feels that way about me, therefore, yikes, I'm uncomfortable with this, I'm going to avoid it altogether. And say, okay, why couldn't we simply just be accepting and saying, okay, you feel that way about me? Why do we take it on our own responsibility, especially women, to feel as if you have to manage the relationship? You simply just offer who you are. And it's not like a rejection or an acceptance. It's kind of like, this is just who I am. Do you want to continue to relate to me if it's not going to turn into a romantic relationship? And not just friendship. It's a good, sound, nice relationship. So anyway, that was just one of many examples. Here's another example in which a person was giving a presentation. The professor skimmed through the paper and said, I don't think there's enough information here. What was interesting about this example here, and I'll read it here, afterward, I am anxious and overwhelmed because I did not know what in the world he expected, and better than terrible is not a confidence boost, because the professor said, oh, you did better than I thought. It's like damning by faint praise. And it was funny is the person that she presented with the same material, but who had to do an independent presentation, felt that the professor felt better toward the first person, a person in our class, because he actually commented, whereas he didn't comment at all on hers. And so she thought, oh, I did more poorly. What this shows is that emotion is so bound up in perception. Your perception of your own feelings and your perception of someone else's feelings. And when these emotions are developed in relationship, you really don't have a good reference for another person's feelings. I think one of the ways to interrupt the pattern here is to simply say, I don't know. Okay? So many times we try to, I think the term is expect the worst, hope for the best and expect the worst. This shows you how our emotional patterns usually get structured around threat much more deeply and much more heavily than they do around positive things. We tend to be much more strongly motivated by avoiding what we consider to be a threat. But again, that's an evolutionary throwback, having to do with actual threats, to our life and limb by animals and by weather and by whatever. Now they're mostly just mental or emotional or symbolic threats. And we're still acting as if we were back in the caveman times. So evolutionary psychology does have something to offer here by way of identifying what's going on inside us. What they don't seem to offer very well is what to do with it. And that's what we're going to try to do in this session. So again, this is going to go on for a little while, but I think it's going to be quite helpful. Okay. There were great examples. One person worked at a Chick-fil-A restaurant, was joking with a patron who she thought was being sarcastic about the service, but was actually being serious about it. This person felt horrible and apologized profusely, but it has again to do with this notion of how our emotional patterns and our interpretations rely on a history of relationship, and in this case, this relationship was a good relationship, so it helped to misinterpret that person's emotional expression. Here's another one where they're engaged in a political conversation about the Women's March after Trump's inauguration, and she thought they were all on the same page, and it turned out the other woman was not. Again, there's difference here, and they're worrying about maintaining that relationship afterward. Um, this one I thought was brilliant right here, because here's the situation that this person steps on her husband's toe, some toes, figuratively speaking, sometimes by inviting her mom over to places with them. And she says, and this is a really key statement here, it talks about emotional intelligence. Okay, this is what I would call an emotional innovation. She said, we don't currently have any kind of signal or code word to help alleviate when one of us is feeling ready to be just our little family without other people around. See, now this is a very emotionally intelligent statement to make. Not only is there identifying a pattern here, which says sometimes there's irritation on the part of the husband because she's invited someone else along like her mom when he just wanted something more intimate just with the family. But the notion that maybe an emotional innovation here would be simply to have a signal, like, or something. I don't know what it would be if they're on the phone, like, no, I want us to be together or something like that. And then it could be, okay, we'll do it another time, with this other family member involving other people. So again, I look for those things when I'm looking in responses, not only your ability to identify these things, but also to interrupt or to create a different pattern or some kind of intervention or innovation that allows you to address the issue. Here the issue is communication. The emotional issue is people feeling not heard, or people feeling like other people are being invited in and cramping their little family life. And the solution is quite simple, is to get into a communication mode where there could be certain signals or signs when a person really wants to be within the small, more intimate family setting. So, and we talked about communication. I'm just going to whiz by some of these. Here's a good one. This shows a good connection between emotion and thinking, okay? It says, from my own experience, I've learned that emotions you experience are shaped by your thoughts and vice versa. For example, when I stress over exams, it is due to the fact that I think about the possible outcomes if I do not do well. That's a perfect example of the connection, right? And here's even better. It goes on, not because the tests themselves cause me to stress or be fearful. It is the set of assumptions and conclusions I reach by thinking that causes me the emotional stress. So again, if you look back into the pattern of this person's emotional pattern, perhaps they've been in family situations or life situations in which they've had to anticipate outcomes. And without anticipating those outcomes, there might be some kind of harm that comes about. I'm not saying this is true of this person, but it's very true in alcoholic families. Oftentimes, they're obsessed with all these possible outcomes and how they can change the behavior to eliminate or to help preempt a violent episode on the part of their alcoholic parent, for instance. So that most people wouldn't say, hey, that has anything to do with my test preparation, but it's an emotional pattern of thinking about all the possible outcomes and trying to anticipate them and stressing and worrying over them and trying to manage them before they happen. And if that can be identified, which this person did brilliantly in this example, and then one can begin to think, what would be an emotional innovation I could bring into this situation? One of them could be that mindfulness or breathing, where you go ahead and just say, okay, it's all right. Okay, I'm feeling these stresses. I'm feeling my mind is wanting to do all these things and to gauge all these outcomes. But I'm just going to sit here and observe these feelings. And what happens so many times is those feelings subside. And you're left with a clear and calmer feeling. And then you go into the test and usually do quite a bit better because you don't have all these feelings plaguing you and dogging you. So some of you, I had talked about breathing or try something nice, right? Something unexpected and surprising. We're testing the notion that if a person doesn't get something from you that's a surprise, and there's no thing that they have to do to repay you back, that it could create an interesting situation, and it could really amplify their emotional appreciation. And it looks like for the most part, almost all of you did find that. It almost followed the same pattern. You would do something surprising that didn't have any condition to it whatsoever. The person was like, what? And then a little suspicious, a little surprised, a little like, no, there's really got to be something underneath this. That person couldn't just be doing this just to do it. Okay. And then in most cases, in almost every case, finally the person was able to relinquish their notion that they had to give something back, and they just really enjoyed themselves. So what this proves is that an unconditional giving, and one that is coupled with surprise, can be a very powerful change of an emotional pattern or emotional response to a situation. So keep that in mind. Make notes on that. We have affirmed it in our experiments that this actually works. Surprise works. Unconditional giving actually works. So, so again, this is what was, I think her response, I think this was talking about her mom, was it a little bit? Oh, yes. Yeah. I think her response shows that she's the kind of person who believes you have to have a reason to do something nice. That's a pretty interesting thing. So again, this notion of obligation and not having a condition. Okay, so she got her mom some flowers just out of the blue. Well, actually, as a result of this assignment, but more or less out of the blue. So some of these are pretty intense. One talked about a boyfriend that had some kind of physical abuse, and it started off well, but then was berating her about not having enough weight. And it turned into physical abuse, and that person was left. What was really interesting about this is that when you have something that's very intense in a very intimate setting early on, things that have to do with self-esteem, self-image, or self-worth, and I've done research on this so I can back this up, it can affect your future perceptions. And here's how she put it. However, my perceptions toward men have been greatly damaged. When I met my husband, it was really hard for me to accept that he was a good guy. I ruined many nice gestures he had toward me by thinking he was only doing them to apologize for something bad he had done or would do in the future. See how that pattern is instantiated? I was reluctant to receiving because I was scared of getting my hopes up and ending up with nothing in the end. Really amazingly, brilliantly, vulnerably put, and just crystal clear in how it's creating this emotional pattern and how it's making this person feel. This has been the most amazing experience for me. I have never seen such honesty and such emotional intelligence in these responses. And the grades reflect it. I mean, that's secondary, but you all were basically getting A's on these. You were so acute and so involved in this. But here's one that was really amazing, and it really shows you how persistent some of these patterns can be. So she said, I found myself in disagreement with my husband, and this is, fairly recently. It was odd to me that though it is that while we were talking, I said to him, I'm not afraid of you, to which he replied, well, no, why would you be? And she kept thinking to herself, why did I say that? Well, it went back to that early pattern of intimidation by that boyfriend way back when. And those things can stay around. I think I used the example in my own life of being, anti-racist and working multicultural education. But this van full of African-American guys came through our neighborhood. It was a sort of a middle-class, largely white, sort of progressive neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. And I got this impulse. Now, I didn't yell or anything, but I got this impulse of, what are you doing here? And I realized that was a flashback to some of my more racist programming growing up in Central Ohio. Again, early on, wasn't too conscious of it, had worked past it and worked into an anti-racist situation, but those feelings were still there. So it's very curious, and it's also a good place for compassion. So instead of judging other people, even people that are racially biased and so forth, the whole idea is to work with where people are and to realize that even you yourself, even if you advance and go on, still have these residues probably, just like this person did here in this example. Okay. And she said, well, maybe it was the way he got on his feet, and maybe and he was, and I felt he was obviously bigger than me, and again, subconsciously thought that he could hurt me, or it subconsciously brought back to that earlier situation. So again, this doesn't mean we're weak or frail. Do you understand that having this kind of awareness and sharing it is helping all of us become much more accepting and much more able to ease into our old patterns and learn from them? Because that's what really changes emotional patterns, is being able to learn them and not be afraid of them, not to be ashamed of them, not to stash them to the side, but to allow them to come forward. And that's, I mean, I'm hoping that's what this class does for everyone there. Another person said, I went out a way to find a babysitter, and this, I think it was for husband as well. And he was appreciative and loving, usually keeps his guard up. But again, a lot of you had a lot of fun with just doing something surprising and good for somebody else. Here's an early trauma experience about being laughed in class because this person was in the wrong classroom, created an aversion of mockery and enduring feeling against injustice and not having a problem with people who are intolerant of mistakes. Again, a lot of this has to do with early childhood and people being mocked for having a mistake or failing or coming up with a different answer or having a silly question. And what it really says a lot is about our society. Does our society support making mistakes, honest, earnest mistakes, and learning from them in what I call a formative rather than evaluative framework? Formative is say you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn from them, we're going to support and challenge you to help move on. We realize eventually you're going to get better. The evaluative is one like, you made a mistake, that's a mark against you. Now you're down here, and if you make another mistake, it's another mark. And if you make some successes, we'll maybe give you a little bit of credit, but not much. Okay? So there's two frameworks going on here. In this class, we want to have more of a formative framework where you're learning to get better at the craft of emotional intelligence, okay? Because when you get out of here, I want your relationships, your professional relationships, personal and family relationships to be healthier. That's the real sign that what we're doing in this class and in these sessions is helping. If I just grade you on citing academic papers, you're going to forget that in 6 months. This you won't forget. This, if you can really bring it forward and bring it into yourself, it'll stay with you and it'll be very helpful. And you'll be able to pass on this emotional intelligence to people that you're working with and people that you care about. That's really the point of this class. I love some of these examples. I said I don't really have a lot of money, but I took the time to pre-pack a lunch, pre-cook a few breakfast wraps, lay out his work clothes, that is, her husband is going to work. And again, great success, all right? Instead of just a good morning, hello text, it was a paragraph of gratitude he felt for, for me having done this for him. Again, what happens here is you're changing the frame. Okay, there's a humdrum kind of morning routine. You make this surprise and you go out as an unconditional type of giving. You're changing the frame. And it changed the frame so much that the rest of her husband's day was affected by that. He starts commenting on the wild weather, and commenting at a nice paid 30-minute wait on a job site. Now, those things are good in themselves, but I bet you anything that frame that started out that morning really set him up, a mood, kicked off and helped to influence a mood in which he is starting to pick out the happier and more interesting and more supportive and more enjoyable things in his life. So, again, another clue right there. Surprise and setting the frame through some unconditional giving can actually change a person's mood. All right. This person talked about being tall and having a crush on a person who says that he would like me back, but if I wasn't that tall. Ouch. Yeah, I just imagine a 10-year-old getting told this, right? And the unlearned theme was not feeling good enough. Okay. Again, these can kind of stick with you. We've seen from Ekman, depending on how intense they are, how repeated they are, how early they are on in your life, these can really affect things. And it takes some time to recover from them. There were other things too, the family's financial situation. Again, trying to, and I think I put it this way, a self put down to repeat versus breaking the negative patterns. Okay, sometimes we acquire the habits and the feelings of other people, and we do it so we can create control of the situation. We put ourselves down instead of letting someone else put us down. But now again, we're trying to say here, instead of this person, my husband is constantly praising me and reassuring me of my worth, and I always have to fight his comments back. I cannot simply say thank you. I have to respond with, you're just saying that to make me feel better, or, oh yeah, the nasty comment to myself goes here, in parentheses. It is exhausting to feel this way. Now, this is the first step to identifying, but it's a really important note to say, okay, I'm doing these things to myself. Why? You know? And by going back into the patterning and begin to define the root and then trying to break the negative pattern. I try to do this with reversal. So I would, in this case, here's how I would use reversal. In this case, I would say, thank you. And even admit, in this case, to her husband, I really respect you saying that to me. And I know that what you're saying is right and true, but there's a part of me that wants to reject it. Okay, and put myself down. So what I'm going to do right now is thank you for that comment, and I'm going to believe it. Okay, I'm going to say, listen, self, think about it, believe it, and instead of saying that nasty comment, yeah, right, nasty comment goes here, say, yeah, right, this, a positive and affirming comment goes here. Again, just trying it. This is called behaviorism. Okay, behaviorism is that if you act it, right, you act it out, even if you're not terribly convinced of your own acting, that the action can change or influence your thinking and your feeling, okay? So in this case, this reversal is a way of using behaviorism, acting as if, in order to begin to change your thought patterns, your emotional patterns and thought patterns. So that would be a good example of using reversal here. Instead of saying a nasty comment, literally concentrate on it, even if you're not convincing yourself, still do it anyway and do it repeatedly. A supportive comment. Yeah, you're right. I am a good person. I am a worthy person. I'm doing really pretty well here, and I'm going to do better. But I'm not going to get down on myself and be all anxious and worried about being perfect. I'm just going to see it as a formative thing, a developmental thing going forward. Okay. Here's what I wanted to say. Here's another good quote from Paul Ekman. Emotions change how we see the world and how we interpret the actions of others. We do not seek to challenge why we are feeling a particular emotion. Instead, we seek to confirm it. Part of what I'm trying to help you do is to challenge the emotion. The fact is, our natural disposition is to have a feeling about something and to look for evidence, including our brain, to confirm the emotion. If I'm angry, I'm looking around for things that would support me being angry. But if you don't want to be angry, look for things that disconfirm or interrupt or challenge that. You know? Use mindfulness or use some kind of equanimity or calmness to say, wait a minute. I don't want to feel angry. I'm not going to keep looking around for things to be angry about. I'm going to change my frame of mind. And sometimes you can't exactly do that easily, but try it. I'll be very curious to see how it goes if you consciously intervene in that way. Here's another good line. For example, if we think negatively about a person simply because of, say, the way she is dressed, we may develop a lasting negative feeling about that person in general that is more critical about more than the clothing. Excellent point. When you have a nasty thought about a particular thing someone does, your feeling tends to generalize that. Oh, the person's a horrible dresser. The person has no taste. The person just doesn't even know how to take care of herself. It just seems to snowball, especially negative thoughts. Positive thoughts are a little bit more resistant to that because I think we have a resistance to thinking of ourselves generally in a positive way. We say, you're a sharp dresser. I'll bet you have great taste. I'll bet you just take care of yourself really well. We don't normally go down that road, and we should. There's no reason why we shouldn't. Another thing we talk about here is emotional fatigue, beating up on yourself. Um, with the video with chapter 2 as a close second really struck a nerve in me as far as compassion toward others and especially myself. I've been extremely hard and mean to myself in the last month, especially. I've had a sort of personal crisis about my individual success in life and goals that I've been working so hard toward. As a result, I have seen the signs of the struggle as reflected in my punctuality, fatigue, and school progress. I need to change my feelings majorly as soon as possible. Not today, this minute, literally. Negative feelings lead to negative thoughts, which lead to negative progress and inaction. Negativity in unspoken words can and does lead to negative outcome. Brilliant, brilliant insight. You don't just need to speak it, even if it's not conscious, okay? Oftentimes, it creates emotional fatigue. Ease off on yourself. What would happen? Here's another experiment we can try. What would happen? You say, okay, all right? It's because it gets to a point here where it's like, it's like a San Andreas fault, right? It's like the pressure is building up. You just want to say, in the end, considering letting my grades slip, that's what she's saying, and to hell with it. just let that earthquake go. It's like it's too much. How to take the pressure off of it? Why have the two plates rubbing together? Why not just take the pressure off of that? And that's pretty much what's going on here. What would actually happen? This is a great experiment. If we find ourselves worrying, we say, listen, what would happen now if I just stopped worrying altogether? What would happen right now? Wouldn't that be an interesting thing? It would be an incredible experience. If we could just say, okay, what would happen? And just say, now imagine the world that would happen if that worry was gone. Perfectionism is gone. You've identified the patterns, but you're just going to let them sit there and observe them. An interesting experiment. Next time you're getting into the perfectionist mode and you're ratcheting everything up, try that and let me know how it goes. Okay. Conditional versus unconditional giving. We've talked about a little bit about that. I'm continuing to go on here. We're already up to 32 minutes. I don't want this to go on forever. Oh yeah, this one person was talking about. I'll just keep on going. We won't. This was an interesting one. How people can judge you in a public space. This person, when she's going out by herself with her child, without her husband, people assuming she's a single woman, and even giving her advice about how to feed her child and being angry at her and tapping her on the shoulder, saying you should feed that kid more. It's amazing what gall people have in public. They're not looking at their own emotional patterns. What they're doing is they're looking and judging others, and they're looking for a person to throw their emotional garbage at. Okay? Now, a lot of you are very sensitive, and I would encourage you to understand that that is what is happening and not to take it personally. Say, again, compassionately, this person's going through a lot. They're looking for someone to throw their emotional garbage on, and they're doing it on me. Now, I could choose to be insulted, or I could choose to understand where it's coming from. And usually it's coming from a person who themselves are insecure and unsatisfied. And so they generate it into a righteous, self-righteous response. So again, another hint. By understanding where someone else's insults are coming from, usually from a place of insecurity, or usually from a place of dissatisfaction or instability, we become less reactive to them when they're acting inappropriately. Okay. Here's another thing I wanted to mention. So many of you, there are many Hispanic women in this class in particular. And if you look at the gender bias around that, especially within Hispanic cultures, a fairly traditional culture, heavily influenced by Catholicism and women being more demure or more deferential to men, it really comes out in a lot of these examples. That's what I call a sociocultural variable. Religion, ethnic culture, gender. These are things that heavily influence emotional patterns, okay? Because they come with societally reinforced expectations that are unreasonable and oftentimes unhealthy. So again, learning those sociocultural variables and learning how they inform your emotional patterns can help you break them. You can say, this is an expectation in Hispanic culture that I would be deferred, that the thing falls on me regardless. I mean, I don't know if you saw the movie like Water for Chocolate, but the oldest daughter is expected, or was it the youngest? Maybe have been the youngest daughter is expected to take care of the mother, right? And if she doesn't, everything falls on her. It's like her fault, even if it's not her fault, you know? She's expected to be the scapegoat or to be the sacrificial lamb. And I notice in a lot of your examples there, that has that kind of flavor. What I wanted to say too in this was to find ways to break out of the pattern, be a little bit outrageous. Okay. One of the examples here was about a person whose sister criticized her for wanting to do solo in a summer camp, and it stuck with her. Like she wouldn't sing in public at all after that. Maybe sing in the car. I'm like, break out of the pattern. Join that school choir. Join a church choir. Join a community choir. Go out and karaoke. Make it my assignment to you to do that. Here was another one. Cell phone distraction is a pet peeve that drives me absolutely crazy. Going back to the pet peeve thing, I said, listen, why not, again, experiment, surprise, disrupt the pattern, okay? Say, listen, you go out with your friends, we are going to try something today. We're not going to use our cell phones. We're going to put them away. We're going to turn them off. If you've got kids, say, we are going to take them out on the hour. We're going to check to make sure everything's okay. Then we're putting them back completely away. We are going to absolutely have face-to-face talking about our lives, our families, whatever it happens to be. And there's going to be no checking, no snapping of pictures. We'll allow a few pictures at the very end to celebrate our night of no cell phone media. That's the only selfie that's going to happen. So there are imaginative ways that you can engage and interrupt these kinds of patterns. Get into the pet peeves, get into the dynamics that are not serving you and other people. Since it is already up on 37 minutes, I think I'm going to fly through these. See if there's anything that comes out. Yeah, this is just a repetition of what I just said. Experiment. Use your emotional EQ, your emotional intelligence, right? It may seem a little bit awkward. Use behaviorism. Change your behaviors. See it as an experiment. See it as, hey, let's try something new. And again, prove the academics wrong. Look at their backgrounds. A lot of academics are introverted nerds. I kind of relate to that. I'm not trying to judge here, okay? But the notion of intervening in their emotions and really looking at their own emotions is not something most academics have been that experienced with. And their research can reflect their personal experience, believe it or not. I'm just going along here. We did talk about culture and gender, right? So I think we can move past this. One had an experience with his brother scaring him on purpose in the dark and that having a lasting effect and ingraining itself. But he actually, and this was true of some other people too. There was a person that had been assaulted and turned it into a reason for strength as a woman. And this person did the same thing too. That fear motivated him to take self-esteem lessons. Or not self-esteem lessons, self-defense lessons. So again, a positive response to a negative event. And that's another form of reversal. Someone made you afraid when you were little, so you, in some sense, reverse it by allowing yourself to allow that fear to motivate you to take self-defense classes or something that's going to make you brave or more courageous or more prepared in a real way, and not just being in a fearful, reactive state. So authority and power can oftentimes come into the situation here. When that humiliation or when that negative emotional experience comes from authority, oftentimes it can amplify the sense of threat. Even as you become older, it becomes hard for you to really process that because you were a younger kid in a lower position of authority there. So again, that's another factor. It's another sociocultural factor that comes into being here. Oh, this had to this had to do with a person asking a question in class about the ears and nose that they never stop growing. The answer to that question is they don't. Cartilage, that is our ear cartilage and our nose cartilage, keep growing throughout our life. And instead, the teacher dismissed it and said, we'd all look like Dumbo. She didn't say they grow like this. They just grow a little bit, but they keep growing throughout your life. Interesting, okay, that actually asking a stupid question, which was a brilliant question, which was born of curiosity and actually happened to be true, then the person misused their authority in the face of that. And the long-lasting effect that can have in terms of intimidation, okay? Afraid to make a mistake, wouldn't raise the hand in class to have this, and then everyone would laugh at me again. Again, the teacher used a kind of cheap trick there, not knowing the effect of that authority and that kind of humiliation, long lasting. And I can tell you, having taught teachers and asked similar questions about their traumatic experiences in school, that this is very common and it can last quite a long time. So, so anyway, I think we've pretty much got at it here. Uh, I think this might be a good one to end on. We're already up to 41 minutes, so it's time to wrap this up. But this is a good way to end it. Okay. Um, I'm going to read a couple of these lines, and really get to the punchline of this whole notion of identifying and changing your emotional patterns, because this really is the key point. And it's this. Okay. So this is a end of middle school. This person really had a mom who was so freaked out about her perfectionism that she literally would physically reinforce it and really be really critical of work that wasn't absolutely perfect. And it created obviously a real emotional situation for her daughter, the student in this class. I said, I attribute my experiences with my mom for much of why I'm a perfectionist now. I dread for people to read my work, but I crave the approval from anyone as confirmation of what I write, that what I write is perfect. I'm extremely self-critical of all my work, regardless of what it is. I smile and thank the person who gives me criticism, regardless if it is positive, productive, or condescending, but inwardly, any criticism makes me angry, defensive, and depressed about my mistakes, okay? And it goes on here. This is an unlearned theme. This statement is somewhat confusing because I'm told my work is perfect. I get angry too, like you're not taking that person seriously. I get mad because I feel like the person reviewing my work isn't scrutinizing it closely enough or wasn't smart enough to see the obvious mistakes. So he developed an identity tied into this critical voice of her mom, internalized and became a critical voice of the person against themselves. Very interesting, very common. I identify this as well. I had a very critical father and critical grandfather. I did that. I internalized that voice. So I very much relate to this. And here it says, my mother berated me for perfect work as an elementary school student. When someone at work, for example, points out a mistake that I've made, two things generally happen. I beat myself completely down for not catching the mistake, and I either laugh about my mistake or crack a self-deprecating joke about it, if it's bad enough of a mistake, to the person. I then proceed to feel like crap about myself for some time after I get extremely angry at myself for missing my mistakes. I work with doctors. I need to be perfect. Okay, again, this notion of perfectionism, which it's good to be focused, and it's good to do the best and to be able to not make a lot of mistakes, especially in the medical profession, but it's not helpful emotionally to get down on yourself. The best way to approach it is to learn from your mistakes and do the best that you can. End of story, almost. But my mom isn't behind my shoulder anymore. She isn't shoving me out of the chair so that she can sit down and rewrite my finished essay. She also isn't there to review my work anymore. My boyfriend is, the closest adult I have, and he really isn't scholarly in the sense of peer reviewing an academic essay. Hearing the phrase, "this is great," infuriates me, totally sets me off. But not toward the person who says it usually, and instead more to myself, because I have both such high expectations of myself and such a low opinion of my writing that I can't possibly find perfection between the two. See, this is the point. There is an irreconcilable game being set up here. where you have such high expectations and low opinions that the two of those will never meet. And it creates this desire to keep going. So what's really the point? What's really the point? Do you want to set yourself up in a game that you can never win? Okay, and that's the evaluation game, right? Where you're evaluating yourself versus the formative or development game, all right? This one's more about joy, okay? And here's the punchline here, okay? What is more important than looking good or even feeling good, okay? Looking good meaning being perfect in the eyes of others and in your own critical imagination, or even feeling good, It's here's the punchline. It's feeling true or real. Feeling true or real. We really are imperfect people. And we really are perfect people. All right? There's, in some sense, we are this weird human combination of imperfection and perfection. We're amazing, we're intelligent, we can do amazing things, and we can do the dumbest things in the world just for no reason at all. And simply accepting that and realizing that the true and real person is a combination of those. Learning to laugh at our mistakes and learn from them, and being forgiving toward others and communicating, right? And also taking absolute joy in the things that we do well instead of critiquing those all the time is what it means to feel true or real versus feeling good or looking good, okay? The real me, the one I hide to deflect threat from my core, okay? That is the motivation that people don't get to their true or real self and let others get there because they're afraid that if they get there, then there's nothing left. If that gets betrayed or that gets exposed or humiliated. But there's a stronger and more adaptable and more flexible real self here, okay? And this real self says, hey, no problem. You know, I'm outrageous. I'm going to get a little bit goofy. I'm going to try and experiment. I'm going to see what happens. I don't have to predict and control all these outcomes. I'm just going to see what happens and do it with a more of a playful attitude. Try the surprise. Try something different. Try intervening into your emotional pattern. Don't get down on yourself. Don't say, oh, I got to change that perfectionist attitude. That's a perfectionist attitude. Trying to change a perfectionist attitude is not going to work. Okay? Ease into it. Try and experiment. Make a mistake on purpose. Literally go out and say, I'm going to actually write grammatically incorrect sentences right now. Right? Just so that my perfectionist self can go crazy and then I can just laugh at myself. See what I mean? See, these are the kinds of interventions and imaginations that allow you to loosen up enough by giving yourself permission to make mistakes and to take joy in it and even use it in a somewhat humorous way. Also, deliberately screw up. Deliberately just try things that don't make sense to you. Instead of trying to make that basketball go through the hoop all the time, just whack it against the backboard or put it way to the left or put it way to the right. Just giving yourself a sense of freedom to have range, to screw up, to kind of be yourself and let yourself be yourself. Be the real, feeling real and true. And that really is a developmental process. You don't really get to your interior self immediately. Feeling real or true really is allowing you to have forgiveness for yourself, joy in yourself, taking pride in the things you do well, and learning from the things that are the mistakes. And then using that introspection and detective game to find the ways in which your past patterns and your present ways of thinking and feeling emotionally intervene, either help that or harm that. So I hope that has gotten you where you need to go. Again, I thank you very much for sharing all these amazing stories. They've transformed my life. It really helped to give a meaning to this class for me. So I want to just give my gratitude toward you. This has been amazing work, such brilliant insights and intelligence, wonderful writing. Just keep this up, okay? Not as a burden, just develop it further. Allow these things to work their way into you. When you have insights, share them, okay? I really, truly appreciate that you've taken the trust to share much of this with me. And I'm trying to pass that trust along in the way of knowledge by sharing some of your examples with others. But again, Thank you much. I'm very grateful for your work. And again, blessings on our collective journey forward. This is Dr. Zeus signing out. Thanks.